Now it's Rebecca's turn. The breathtaking entitlement of that statement left me momentarily speechless. My time with my son wasn't a limited resource to be handed over to someone else. I think you should leave, I said quietly. Diane stood, smoothing her expensive slacks. Just think about what's really important here, Patricia. Do you want to be alone, or do you want to be part of your son's life? Because Rebecca is his future, and if you force him to choose. She left the threat hanging as she walked to the door. You know, I said as she reached for the handle. I raised Thomas to stand up for the people he loves. I just never thought I'd need him to stand up for me. After Diane left, I sat in the sudden silence of my home, thinking about her parting advice. Was I willing to be cut out of Thomas's life completely? Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching. The thought sent a physical pain through my chest, but the alternative, continuing to be diminished, disrespected, and eventually discarded anyway, seemed worse. I had spent 3 years trying to accommodate Rebecca, and all it had gotten me was that moment at the engagement party. We don't have to pretend she matters. That night, I pulled out old photo albums. Thomas learning to ride a bike. Thomas at his high school graduation, beaming as I adjusted his cap. Thomas helping me plant the garden after Harold died, telling me we needed to keep living, Mom, somewhere. In the years since, I had lost my son. But perhaps the harder truth was that I had been losing him by inches all along, giving and giving until he expected everything, valuing my presence only for what I could provide. As I closed the album, I made a decision. I would not chase my son's approval anymore. I would not compete for a place in his life. I had to find a way to be whole without him, at least until he could see me as a person again, not just a resource to be used or discarded. 3 days. After Diane's visit, Thomas showed up at my door unannounced. I was repotting African violets on the sun porch, a Saturday morning ritual that usually brought me peace. When the doorbell rang, I knew who it would be before I even looked. Mom, he said, his voice softening in that way it always did when he wanted something. Can we talk? I wiped soil from my hands and let him in. He looked tired, dark circles under his eyes, his normally neat hair slightly disheveled. Coffee? I offered. Please. We sat at my kitchen table, sunlight streaming through the window onto the worn oak surface where Thomas had done his homework as a boy. The silence stretched between us until I finally broke it. I assume Rebecca sent you. He flinched slightly. No one sent me. I wanted to clear the air. All right. Thomas stared into his coffee mug. Mom, I know Rebecca can be difficult sometimes, but she's under a lot of pressure with the wedding and… Thomas, I interrupted gently. What Rebecca said wasn't a slip under pressure. It was deliberate. He shifted uncomfortably. She didn't mean it the way it sounded. How many ways are there to interpret we don't have to pretend she matters? Thomas had no answer for that. Instead, he changed tactics. Look, Rebecca and I have been talking. We understand you're upset about the wedding costs. Do you? Yes, and we've come up with a solution. He leaned forward, suddenly animated. Instead of giving us money, you could sign over the lake house. It would actually be worth more than what you were going to spend on the wedding, so it's a better deal for you. The calculated nature of the proposal made my stomach turn. The lake house isn't for sale, Thomas, and it's certainly not a bargaining chip. Mom, be reasonable. You barely use it anymore. I use it enough. I kept my voice steady. And it's where your father and I built our life together. Thomas's expression hardened. Dad's been gone for 8 years. And that means I should just give away our home? It wouldn't be giving it away, he argued. It would stay in the family, like I would stay in the family, I asked quietly. Or would I be pushed aside there too? He stood abruptly, pacing across my kitchen. This is exactly what Rebecca means. You always make everything about you. The unfairness of that statement hit me like a physical blow. When had I ever put myself first with Thomas? I'd worked 2 jobs after his father left, postponed my own education, sacrificed vacations and new clothes and dinners out, all to give him opportunities. I've spent my entire life making everything about you, Thomas, I said, my voice remarkably calm despite the storm inside me. But I won't give you my home. His face flushed with anger. Then what about the wedding? You promised, Mom. I promised before I knew how little I mattered to you and Rebecca. So that's it? You're just backing out? I'm choosing not to fund a celebration where I'm not welcome. Thomas slammed his mug down. Rebecca was right about you all along. You're manipulative and selfish. The words struck deep, but I refused to show how much they hurt. Is that what she tells you? She sees through your act, he said bitterly. The way you try to control everything, the way you've never accepted her. I've tried, Thomas. For 3 years, I've tried. But there's a difference between acceptance and allowing yourself to be erased. He laughed, a harsh sound without humor. Erased? You're being dramatic. When was the last time you came for Sunday dinner? When was the last time you called just to talk, not because you needed something? When was the last time you stood up for me when Rebecca made one of her cutting remarks? Thomas had no answer. Instead, he looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Cold, calculating, like I was a problem to be solved. Here's how. This is going to work, he said finally. Either you help with the wedding like you promised or give us the lake house as a wedding present. Otherwise, Rebecca doesn't want you at the wedding. And frankly, neither do I. The ultimatum hung in, the air between us. I felt something inside me break. Not my resolve, but the last fragile hope that my son still saw me as someone worthy of basic respect. I see, I said quietly. Think about it, Mom, Thomas said, his voice softening slightly. Do you really want to miss your only son's wedding? Do you want to be alone for the rest of your life? There it was again, the same threat Diane had made. My future distilled down to compliance or isolation. I'm not the one drawing these lines. Thomas, he moved toward the door. You have until next Friday to decide. Rebecca needs to know whether to include you in the seating chart. He paused, hand on the doorknob. And Mom, Rebecca's family is completely unified on this. They've been more supportive of me than you ever were. After he left, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, my coffee growing cold. The threat was clear. Choose between my dignity and my relationship with my son. I picked up the phone and called Sarah. He actually gave you an ultimatum, she asked, outrage evident in her voice. Yes. And let me guess, Rebecca orchestrated the whole thing. I think so, I admitted. But Thomas delivered it willingly enough. Sarah was quiet for a moment. You know, Jack asked me yesterday if he could call Grandma. I thought he meant me. But he meant you. He's working on a school project about family trees and wanted to ask you about Dad. The simple mention of my grandson wanting to talk to me about Harold brought tears to my eyes. Mom, whatever you decide about Thomas, the kids and I are here. You're not alone. After we hung up, I walked through my house to the small office, where I kept important papers. In the bottom drawer of my desk, beneath tax documents and insurance policies, was a folder labeled Harold. Inside were the papers from the lake house purchase, the deed with both our names, and a letter my husband had written to me before he died. I hadn't read it in years. My dearest Pat, it began in Harold's neat handwriting. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're facing life without me. I know how strong you are, stronger than you've ever given yourself credit for. Remember that our love built a life, not just a family. The children are our greatest joy, but you are a whole person beyond being their mother. I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and returned it to the folder. Harold had always seen me clearly, even when I couldn't see myself. That night, I wrote 2 letters of my own, one to Thomas explaining my decision, and one to Rebecca, which was much shorter. Both would wait until Friday. I had a week to be absolutely certain of my choice, though in my heart I already knew what it would be. The week of Thomas's ultimatum passed slowly. I spent most of it at the lake house, sitting on the dock Harold had built with his own hands, watching herons stalk the shallows. The water held memories. Thomas learning to swim, Sarah catching her first fish, Harold and I sharing wine under the stars after the children were asleep. How could I possibly give this place away? Not just for the memories, but for what it represented. The life Harold and I had created together, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. On Wednesday, my phone rang. It was my sister-in-law, Judith, Harold's sister and Thomas's favorite aunt. Patricia, she said, her normally warm voice tight with concern. What's this I hear about you refusing to attend Thomas's wedding? I sighed. Let me guess. Rebecca called you. No, Thomas did. He's very upset, Pat. He says you're making demands and threatening to skip the wedding if he doesn't comply. The manipulation was so transparent it would have been laughable if it weren't so painful. That's not what happened, Judith. I explained everything. Rebecca's public declaration, the wedding bill, Thomas's demand for the lake house, and finally, the ultimatum. Silence followed. Then, oh, At my daughter-in-law's engagement party, she announced, "From now on, we don't have to pretend she matters." I raised my glass. A week later, she received the full wedding bill I was going to pay, and the look on her face was worth every penny. I'd never spend. I'm Patricia Sullivan, 65 years old, and that moment at the Four Seasons Hotel changed everything. I'd kept quiet through months of subtle insults from Rebecca. I'd smiled when my son Thomas moved across town at her insistence. I'd even nodded understandingly when they canceled our Sunday dinners because Rebecca suddenly had scheduling conflicts. The engagement party was elegant. Crystal chandeliers, white orchids, silver table settings. Thomas looked handsome but anxious, his eyes constantly seeking Rebecca's approval. I wore my best burgundy dress, the one my late husband Harold always loved, with new shoes that pinched my toes. I wanted to show Thomas I was making an effort. During the toast, Rebecca stood up, champagne in hand. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight," she said with practiced sweetness. "Family means everything to me, and I'm so blessed to be joining Thomas's." She paused, and my heart lifted slightly. Well, the parts of his family that matter. Anyway, uncomfortable chuckles rippled through the crowd as eyes darted toward me. "I think we all know some relationships just complicate things," Rebecca continued, her gaze settling on me. "And from now on, we don't have to pretend she matters." Silence fell. Thomas said nothing, just stared at his plate, cheeks flushed. Years of accommodating and making excuses crystallized into perfect clarity. I stood slowly, every eye turning to me, expecting tears or a scene. Instead, I raised my glass, met Rebecca's gaze directly, took a deliberate sip, then gathered my purse and walked out with my head high. In the taxi home, I finally cried, not for Rebecca's cruelty, but for Thomas's silence. My son, who I'd raised alone after his father left, who I'd worked 2 jobs to put through college, sat there while his future wife publicly erased me. I thought about the check in my desk drawer, the one covering their lavish $45,000 venue, plus catering, band, flowers, and everything else Rebecca deemed essential. I'd taken out a home equity loan against my lake house, my sanctuary since Harold passed, convinced it was worth it to maintain a relationship with my son. But something inside me refused to bend further. I tore up the check, created an itemized bill for every wedding expense I'd promised to cover, and slipped it under their door the next morning. 3 days later, Thomas stormed into my garden, waving the bill. "What is this? Some kind of joke?" "No. Thomas, it's a bill. But you promised—" "I promised to pay for the wedding of a son who respected me," I said steadily. "That offer no longer stands." "Is this because of what Rebecca said?" "She was just joking. You're being too sensitive." The familiar words, "too sensitive," hit like a physical blow. I'd heard them from his father, from bosses, and now from my son. "If that was her joke," I said, "then she has a cruel sense of humor, and you allowed it." Thomas ran his hand through his hair, just like his father used to do. "Rebecca feels like you've never accepted her. I've invited her to every family gathering. I've remembered every birthday. I've listened to her criticize my home, cooking, and appearance without complaint," I said. "What would acceptance look like to her?" He had no answer. We stood surrounded by the roses Harold and I had planted, silence stretching between us. Finally, Thomas pocketed the bill. "Rebecca's going to be upset." "I imagine she will be." "Mom, we can't afford this." "Then perhaps consider a wedding within your means." His eyes widened. "You're serious?" "Yes, I am." He turned to leave, then stopped. "Rebecca thinks we should ask for the lake house as a wedding present instead. It would make a perfect weekend." Getaway. The breath left my body. So that was it. The real reason for the extravagant wedding plans. They wanted my home. "The lake house is not for sale or gifting," I said coldly. "Not now. Not ever." Thomas shook his head. "This isn't like you, Mom. You've always given me everything." As he walked away, I realized he was right. I had always given him everything. And somehow, that had taught him I was worth nothing. I spent the next morning sitting on my porch swing, watching chickadees dart between the bird feeders Harold had hung years ago. The garden needed weeding, but I couldn't summon the energy. My confrontation with Thomas had left me hollow. My phone rang 5 times before noon, Thomas twice, Rebecca once, and her mother twice. I let them all go to voicemail. Rebecca's message was particularly telling. "Patricia, this childish behavior is exactly why Thomas and I have had to create boundaries with you." Boundaries. Such a convenient word for systematic exclusion. It hadn't always been this way. When Thomas first introduced Rebecca 3 years ago, I'd been genuinely happy for him. She was beautiful, ambitious, and seemed to make my son smile, in a way I hadn't seen since before his father left. I remembered how I'd invited them for dinner that first night, made Thomas's favorite pot roast, used my good china, even bought flowers for the table. Rebecca had arrived with a bottle of wine, examined my modest living room with barely concealed judgment, and proceeded to tell me how she would update everything if it were her home. "These curtains are so retro," she'd said, not as a compliment. Still, I'd smiled and thanked her for her design insights. I wanted Thomas to be happy, and if Rebecca was his choice, I would make it work. The real change came 6 months into their relationship, when Rebecca orchestrated their move to Oakwood Heights, an upscale neighborhood on the other side of town. Thomas had always lived within a 10-minute drive of me. Suddenly, he was 45 minutes away in good traffic. "It's a better investment, Mom," he'd explained, not meeting my eyes, and closer to Rebecca's parents. Sunday dinners became monthly, then quarterly. Thomas started missing my birthday, making last-minute excuses. When I was hospitalized with pneumonia last winter, he visited once for 20 minutes while Rebecca waited in the car. "She's got a thing about hospitals," he'd explained. My phone buzzed with a text from my daughter, Sarah. "Mom, call me when you can. Thomas just called me ranting about money and the wedding." Sarah lived in Portland with her husband and my 2 grandchildren, Emma and Jack. Unlike Thomas, Sarah called regularly, visited when she could, and made sure the kids knew their grandmother. I sighed and called her back. "Mom, what's going on?" Sarah asked, concern evident in her voice. "Thomas is saying you're trying to ruin his wedding." "I'm not trying to ruin anything," I replied, explaining what had happened at the engagement party and afterward. "She actually said that? In front of everyone?" Sarah's voice rose in disbelief. "And Thomas just sat there?" "Yes. And now they want the lake house? The one you and Dad built together?" "Apparently, it would make a perfect weekend getaway," I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Mom, you know I love Thomas, but I don't even know what to say. Rebecca's turned him into someone I barely recognize." "I know. Emma asked me last week why Uncle Thomas doesn't come to Grandma's for Christmas anymore. The kids miss him." That simple comment, "the kids miss him," brought tears to my eyes. It wasn't just me being erased. It was an entire family constellation being redrawn with me outside its borders. "What are you going to do?" Sarah asked. "I don't know yet," I admitted, "but I'm not paying for that wedding, and I'm certainly not giving them the lake house." "Good," Sarah said firmly. "It's about time someone stood up to Rebecca. And to Thomas, for that matter." After we hung up, I went inside and made tea, my mind drifting back to the early days after Harold died. Thomas had been my rock then, coming over to fix things around the house, having dinner with me several times a week, making sure I wasn't alone too much with my grief. What had changed? Had Rebecca really wielded that much influence, or had Thomas always harbored resentments I never saw? The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Through the peephole, I saw Rebecca's mother, Diane, standing on my porch with a too bright smile. I briefly considered pretending I wasn't home, but squared my shoulders and opened the door. "Patricia, dear," Diane said, as if we were old friends. We'd met exactly 4 times. I thought we should chat, woman to woman. I reluctantly invited her in, offering tea which she declined with a slight grimace. "I'll be direct," she said, settling primly on my couch. "This wedding means everything to Rebecca, and Thomas is devastated that you're withdrawing your support." "Is that what he told you?" I asked. "He said you're upset about some silly comment Rebecca made. You know how young people are. They say things without thinking." Diane waved her hand dismissively. "But family has to rise above." "Was it silly? When Rebecca asked for my lake house? The one my husband and I built together?" Diane's smile faltered. "Well, you have to admit it's just sitting there most of the time. And you're not getting any younger, Patricia. Wouldn't it be nice to know it stays in the family?" "It will stay in the family," I said evenly. "When I decide it's time." Diane leaned forward, her voice softening to a conspiratorial tone. "Look, we all know Thomas is, well, he's always been a bit dependent on you. Rebecca's trying to help him become more independent by isolating him from his family, by building their own life," she countered. "Surely you can understand that. You've had your time with Thomas. Pat. I had no idea things had gotten so bad. Neither did I until recently. But surely there's some compromise." "What would you suggest?" I asked. That I give them the lake house and accept being treated like an unwelcome obligation? Or that I pay for the wedding of a son who stood silent while his fiancée announced I don't matter? Judith sighed. When you put it that way. But Pat, it's his wedding. Yes, it is. And as he made very clear, I'm only welcome if I pay for it. I'll talk to him, Judith promised. There has to be a way through this that doesn't end with you being cut out of his life. After we hung up, I realized the family divide had begun. People would be forced to choose sides, to decide whether Thomas's behavior was acceptable. Some, like Sarah, would stand firmly with me. Others would push for peace at any price, usually a price paid only by me. Sure enough, by Thursday morning, my phone was buzzing constantly with messages from family members. Thomas's cousin Mark suggested I swallow my pride for the sake of family harmony. Harold's brother Richard thought I should consider the lake house transfer as an early inheritance. My niece Elaine simply asked, "Is all this really worth losing your son over?" Not one person had asked if Thomas's behavior was worth losing his mother over. By Thursday afternoon, I was emotionally exhausted. I turned off my phone and drove back to town, stopping at the small bakery where I'd ordered every birthday cake Thomas had ever had, from his dinosaur-themed 5th to his college graduation. Mrs. Sullivan, Maria, the owner, greeted me warmly. "How are you? I haven't seen you in ages." "I'm all right," I said, not quite convincingly. Maria studied me with kind eyes. "You don't look all right. Coffee? I just made a fresh pot." We sat at a small table by the window, and somehow, surrounded by the comforting smells of vanilla and cinnamon, I found myself telling Maria everything. "I know Thomas," she said when I finished. "Not just as your son, but as a customer. He comes in sometimes with that fiancé of his." Maria's expression darkened. She sent back a cake once, said the roses weren't the exact shade of pink she'd specified, made him demand a refund even though there was nothing wrong with it. "That sounds like Rebecca." "He wasn't always like this," Maria said, refilling my coffee. "He used to be so kind, like you. Remember when he helped me fix my delivery van that summer before college?" I did remember. Thomas had spent 3 days under the hood of Maria's ancient van, determined to save her the cost of a mechanic. "People change," I said. "Sometimes," Maria agreed. "And sometimes they just get lost for a while." She squeezed my hand. "Whatever you decide about the wedding, Patricia, know that you've been a good mother. The best. If Thomas can't see that right now, it's his loss." I left the bakery feeling strangely lighter. Maria's simple acknowledgement of my worth, something my own son couldn't seem to muster, had restored something in me. At home, I found Sarah waiting on my porch swing. "Surprise," she said, standing to hug me. "I caught the first flight I could. What about the kids? Your work?" "The kids are with Ben's parents, and work can wait. This is more important." We went inside, and Sarah listened as I recounted the events of the week. Unlike the others, she asked no questions about compromise or keeping the peace. "So tomorrow's the deadline," she said when I finished. "Have you decided?" "Yes," I said. "I have. And?" "I'm not giving them the lake house, and I'm not paying for the wedding." Sarah nodded, unsurprised. "Then you probably won't be invited." "I know. Are you okay with that?" I considered the question carefully. "I don't think I'll ever be okay with missing my son's wedding. But I'll be less okay with teaching him that he can demand my home in exchange for a place in his life." "I'm proud of you, Mom," Sarah said. "It takes courage to stand up for yourself, especially against your own child." We spent the evening looking through old photos and talking about Harold, how he would have handled this situation, what advice he might have given. Sarah's presence was a balm, a reminder that even if Thomas chose to cut me out, I still had family who valued me. The next morning, deadline day, Sarah made breakfast while I finalized my letters. The one to Thomas was hardest to write. "How do you tell your child that you love them enough to let them go, but not enough to let them destroy you in the process?" The doorbell rang at precisely 10 o'clock. Thomas stood on the porch, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Thomas?" I said, stepping aside to let him in. "I wasn't expecting you in person. I thought this conversation should happen face to face." His eyes widened when he saw Sarah in the kitchen doorway. "Sarah? What are you doing here?" "Supporting Mom," she said simply. Thomas's jaw tightened. "This doesn't concern you." "Anything that affects Mom concerns me," Sarah replied, her voice calm but firm. Thomas turned back to me. Have you made your decision? I nodded and handed him the 2 sealed envelopes, one addressed to him, one to Rebecca. What's this? He asked. My answer, I said. I'd prefer you read it in private. He stared at the envelopes, then at me. Just tell me, Mom. Are you giving us the lake house or paying for the wedding? Neither, I said quietly. Thomas's face flushed. Then I guess there's nothing left to say. There's plenty left to say, I replied. It's all in the letter. He shoved the envelopes into his pocket. Rebecca was right. You never really loved me. If you did, you wouldn't be doing this. The accusation stung, but I held my ground. Love isn't measured by what you're willing to give up, Thomas. Sometimes it's measured by what you're willing to stand up for. Save the life lessons, he snapped. You've made your choice. As he turned to leave, Sarah called after him. Thomas, wait. He paused. The kids miss you, she said. Whatever happens between you and Mom, don't punish Emma and Jack by disappearing from their lives too. Something flickered across his face. Regret, perhaps, or shame, but it vanished quickly. Tell them Uncle Thomas is busy, he said, and walked out the door. The wedding invitation never came. Not that I expected it after Thomas stormed out that Friday morning. 3 weeks passed without a word from my son, though the family grapevine kept me informed of developments. The wedding was downsized considerably. The Westbrook Country Club became a local hotel ballroom. The 8-piece band became a DJ. The custom floral arrangements became standard centerpieces. Rebecca's furious, Judith reported during one of our weekly phone calls. She's telling everyone you ruined her special day. And Thomas? I couldn't help asking. Judith hesitated. He's different, quiet. When Rebecca complains about the scaled-back wedding, he just nods and agrees. On the morning of Thomas's wedding day, I woke early, a heaviness in my chest. I had imagined this day differently, helping my son straighten his tie, perhaps sharing a quiet moment of advice before he took this significant step. Instead, I was an outsider, uninvited and unwanted. Sarah called just after breakfast. How are you holding up? I'm fine, I lied. Mom. All right, I'm not fine, I admitted. But I will be. I could come over, Sarah offered. Ben could watch the kids. No, honey. You have your hands full. Besides, I have plans. It wasn't entirely untrue. Weeks earlier, I had received an invitation to a gallery opening. A former colleague from my teaching days was showing her watercolors. I had initially declined, knowing it fell on Thomas's wedding day. Now I decided to go. Good, Sarah said. You shouldn't be alone today. After we hung up, I wandered into my closet and fingered the navy blue dress I had purchased months ago, what I would have worn to my son's wedding. It hung unworn, tags still attached. I pushed it aside and selected a simple red dress instead. Red for courage, red for new beginnings. At 2 p.m., the exact time Thomas's ceremony was scheduled to begin, I was standing in a sunlit gallery, sipping Chardonnay, and admiring Eleanor's luminous paintings of coastal scenes. Patricia, you came. Eleanor embraced me warmly. I'm so glad. Your work is wonderful, I said sincerely. These seascapes capture something transcendent. That's exactly what I was going for, she beamed. Moments of light breaking through. As I moved through the gallery, I found myself drawn to one painting in particular. A solitary figure standing on a rocky shore, waves crashing around her, sunrise breaking on the horizon. There was strength in the posture, a resolute quality to the small figure facing the vast ocean. That one's called Beginning Again, Eleanor said, appearing at my elbow. Do you like it? I love it, I said honestly. Then it's yours. A gift. Eleanor? I couldn't possibly. Please, she insisted. It belongs with you. I felt tears prick my eyes. Thank you. As the afternoon progressed, I met several of Eleanor's friends, most of them women my age or older, many with fascinating stories. There was Margaret, who had started a literacy program in retirement, Celeste, who had recently returned from hiking the Camino de Santiago, and Helen, a widow like me, who had found unexpected joy in community theater. We meet for lunch once a month, Helen told me. You should join us. I surprised myself by saying, I'd like that. By the time I left the gallery, evening was settling over the city. I had spent the entire afternoon engaged in conversation, appreciating art, and exchanging phone numbers with potential new friends. Not once had I checked my phone for messages from Thomas. At home, I hung Eleanor's painting in my living room. then poured a glass of wine and stepped out onto my back porch. The garden needed attention. Perhaps tomorrow I would finally tackle those weeds. For now, I sat watching fireflies rise from the grass as twilight deepened. My phone rang. I expected Sarah checking in. Instead, Judith's name appeared on the screen. Patricia? Her voice sounded strange, tight. Judith? What's wrong? It's about the wedding, she said. There was an incident. My pulse quickened. Is Thomas all right? Yes. Physically, he's fine. But, she paused. Rebecca's mother had too much to drink at the reception. She started talking, loudly, about how they'd almost gotten your lake house, how Rebecca had been working Thomas for months to convince you to sign it over. I closed my eyes, pain and vindication washing over me in equal measure. Go on, she said, and I'm quoting here, "We almost had waterfront property for free, can you believe it? All Rebecca had to do was play nice with the old lady for a few more months." Thomas heard this? Everyone heard it, Judith confirmed. Thomas looked. I've never seen him like that, Pat. He just walked out, left in the middle of his own reception. Sat with this information, unsure how to feel. Part of me ached for my son's humiliation. Another part, a part I wasn't entirely proud of, felt a grim satisfaction that the truth had finally come to light. There's more, Judith continued. Rebecca's been telling everyone that you demanded cash to attend the wedding, that you tried to extort them. What? That's absurd. I know. That's why I started showing people the letter. I froze. What letter? The one you wrote to Thomas. He dropped it when he left the reception. I picked it up, and I'm sorry, Pat. I read it. It was the only way to know what was really going on. The letter. In it, I had laid bare my heart, my love for Thomas, my grief at his treatment of me, my hope that someday he would see the manipulation for what it was. I had also included bank statements showing the home equity loan I'd taken out to pay for their original wedding plans, proving I had been willing to sacrifice for his happiness. You showed it to people at the wedding? Only after Rebecca started spreading lies about you, Judith defended. Pat, people needed to know the truth. I wasn't sure how to feel about my private words being shared, even in my defense, but the damage was done. How did they react? I asked finally. Many people left, Judith said. Rebecca's parents are furious. Her mother's being called a gold digger. And Rebecca? Well, she's threatening to sue you for defamation, though I don't see how that would work since you didn't actually say anything. Your letter was just honest. I sighed, suddenly tired. And Thomas? Where is he now? No one knows, Judith admitted. He's not answering his phone. After we hung up, I sat in the darkness, fireflies still blinking around me like earthbound stars. I had not wanted this public spectacle, this humiliation for my son. Despite everything, I loved him. I wanted him to be happy, truly happy, not caught in Rebecca's web of manipulation and greed. I considered calling him but decided against it. Whatever revelation Thomas had experienced today, he needed to process it in his own way. Pushing now would only drive him further away. Instead, I texted Sarah a brief update, then went inside. Tomorrow would be soon enough to deal with the fallout. Tonight, I would sit with Eleanor's painting, beginning again, and remind myself that even the darkest clouds eventually part to reveal light. A month passed after the wedding disaster. Life settled into a new rhythm. Gardening in the mornings, lunch with my new friends from the gallery once a week, evening calls with Sarah and the grandchildren. I had joined a book club at the local library and volunteered teaching art to seniors at the community center. The days were full, purposeful, but Thomas's absence remained a hollow space in my heart. I heard bits of news through Judith. Thomas and Rebecca were taking some time apart. He had moved into a hotel, then a small apartment. Rebecca was telling anyone who would listen that I had poisoned her marriage. I didn't reach out to Thomas. This was his journey, his realization, to come to on his own. Instead, I focused on rebuilding my life, not around his absence, but despite it. On a crisp autumn Saturday, I was at the lake house raking leaves from the dock when a familiar car pulled into the gravel driveway. My heart leaped to my throat as Thomas stepped out, looking thinner than I remembered, dark circles under his eyes. He stood awkwardly by his car, hands in his pockets. "Mom," he called, his voice carrying across the yard. I set down my rake and walked toward him, unsure what to expect. Can we talk? He asked when I reached him. I nodded and gestured toward the porch swing. We sat side by side, not touching, the silence between us heavy with unspoken words. I read your letter, he finally said. Really read it after the wedding. I waited, giving him space to continue. You were right. His voice cracked slightly. About everything. Rebecca, her mother, the lake house, all of it. I'm sorry, I said, meaning it. I never wanted to be right about that. Thomas looked out at the water, blinking rapidly. I keep asking myself how I didn't see it. How I let her convince me that you were the problem. Love can be blinding, I offered. It wasn't love, he said flatly. It was. I don't know. The way she made me feel important, special. Like I was rescuing her somehow. He shook his head. But the whole time she was just using me to get to you, to this place. I reached out and covered his hand with mine. He didn't pull away. When her mother said those things at the reception about playing nice with the old lady to get the lake house, it was like waking up from a bad dream. He turned to me, his eyes red-rimmed. I'm so ashamed, Mom. We all make mistakes, Thomas. This was more than a mistake, he insisted. I let Rebecca isolate me from you, from Sarah, from the kids. I stood there at our engagement party and let her humiliate you. I threatened to cut you out of my life if you didn't give us your home. His voice broke. What kind of son does that? The question hung in the air between us. I had asked myself the same thing many times over the past months. A son who lost his way, I said finally. But who found it again? Thomas shook his head. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Maybe not. I agreed. But you have it anyway. That's how love works, Thomas. Real love, not the conditional kind Rebecca offered. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I filed for an annulment, he said. It should be finalized next month. I squeezed his hand. Are you okay? No, he admitted. But I will be. He looked around at the lake house, at the trees Harold had planted, at the dock we had built as a family. This place means so much more than I realized. Not because of the property value, but because of the memories. That's why I couldn't. Give it up, I said. I know that now. He took a deep breath. I've been seeing a therapist, trying to understand how I let things get so bad, how I became someone who would treat his own mother that way. And it's a process, he said with a small, sad smile, but I'm working on it. We sat in silence for a while, watching a pair of ducks glide across the lake's surface. I thought about the months of pain, the tears, the sleepless nights, but also about the strength I had found, the new friendships, the rediscovery of myself beyond being Thomas's mother. I want to rebuild our relationship, Thomas said finally, if you'll let me. I know it won't happen overnight, and I know I have to earn your trust again. Yes, I agreed. You do. I'd like to start with Sunday dinners again, he suggested. If that's okay. I considered this. Every other Sunday, I countered. I have a standing lunch date with friends on the alternating weekends. Thomas looked surprised, then smiled. You made new friends? I did, I said. Life didn't stop when you left it, Thomas. He nodded, accepting this new reality. Every other Sunday then. Before he left that afternoon, Thomas helped me finish raking the leaves. It was a small thing, insignificant really, but it felt like a beginning, tentative and fragile, but real. 2 weeks later, Thomas came for dinner as promised. He brought a bottle of wine and a small, wrapped package. What's this? I asked. Open it, he urged. Inside was a framed photograph. Thomas and me on this very dock, taken years ago when he was still a boy. We were laughing, our fishing poles forgotten beside us, the sunset painting the water gold behind us. I found it when I was moving into my new place, he explained. I thought you might want it. I ran my finger over the glass, remembering that day. Thank you. Dinner was quiet, a little awkward at times, but genuine. Thomas told me about his new apartment, his therapy sessions, his tentative plans to return to school for a master's degree. I told him about my art classes, my book club, my lunches with Eleanor and Helen. Sarah wants you to come for Thanksgiving, I mentioned as he was leaving. The kids miss you. A shadow crossed his face. Do you think she'll forgive me too? Eventually, I said, not sugarcoating it. Sarah's protective of me, but she loves you. He nodded, accepting the complicated truth of family relationships, how they bend and strain, but don't always break. As months passed, our every other Sunday dinners became a fixture. Sometimes Sarah and her family joined us when they visited. The first time Thomas saw his niece and nephew again, Emma approached him cautiously. Uncle Thomas, Where did you go? You disappeared. I saw the pain flash across his face. I made some mistakes, Em, but I'm back now, if that's okay. She considered this with the straightforward wisdom of a child. Don't disappear again. Disappear again, she said finally. It made Grandma sad. I won't, he promised, looking at me over her head. I'm not going anywhere. A year after the wedding that wasn't, I sat on my porch swing, watching Thomas show Jack how to plant tulip bulbs in my garden. Sarah was inside, helping Emma bake cookies. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the lawn, and I felt a contentment I hadn't expected to find again. My phone buzzed with a text from Helen. Still on for the museum tomorrow? Eleanor's picking me up at 10. I smiled and replied, wouldn't miss it. Life had found a new balance. Thomas was working to rebuild what he had broken. Sarah and the children were regular presences in my life. My circle of friends had widened, bringing new joy and connection, and I had discovered something essential along the way. My worth wasn't determined by my children's choices or validation. It was inherent, undiminished by Rebecca's cruelty or Thomas's temporary blindness. I wasn't just a mother or a grandmother. I was Patricia Sullivan, whole, complete, and finally, truly seen.